Our objective is 1,000 ounces. Faith and I need to make this work because it's a big gamble. Two empires of gold miners were headed for conflict. A single lost piece of steel prohibited Kevin Beets, son of the great Tony Beets, from striking off on his own. The key was in Parker Schnabel, Tony's fiercest opponent. $11,000. For that one, 11 grand is a good price. You have nothing to pay for right now. You open a tab. Thank you for that. Do it. I am quite thrilled. I am aware of how challenging it can be to get started. That's fantastic. A minor issue wouldn't be resolved by their meeting. It would spark a collaboration that would defy all predictions. An impending dream. Kevin Beets had a huge objective, 1,000 ounces of gold. This was his year to show that he could manage his own gold mine and emerge from his father's lengthy shadow. He and his spouse, Faith, spent every dime they owned on renting the Scribner Creek property from his father, Tony. It was a big risk. I have ambitious intentions to establish a gold mine and control it. Indeed, we possess 1,000 ounces of gold. The strategy seemed obvious. As soon as you can, get in, remove the worthless dirt, and begin sleuthing for gold. The difficulties began to pile up immediately. Tony lent Kevin some old, worn-out equipment that was in dire need of repair. His morning had a horrible start because two important airlines on one machine were already broken. My morning is off to a bad start because a few of the airlines have broken up. Kevin was aware that there were drawbacks to using his father's equipment. Kevin intended to manage his business in a far different way than Tony did. He had to start somewhere, though. He brought in a secret weapon to aid him. The one and only Parker Schnabel's once employed Brendan Rule, a skilled earth mover. Here I am, back up in the Yukon. I truly want to help Kevin and Faith, and I'm going to be a foreman. The addition of Brennan was really beneficial. He returned prepared to move dirt after a difficult 6 years and an explosive finish to his stint with Parker's crew. If anyone wants to go home, they can do so right now. I'm not sure if mails are rushing home or something. He was familiar with the place. Just across the trees was Parker's former claim. It seemed as though the stars were aligning. Kevin showed him the 44-acre claim, indicating where they intend to begin with the 11-acre connections cut. Drill holes revealed 15 to 20 feet of mud on top of the pay dirt, indicating that the ground was promising. According to Tony's drill holes and my meager exploration, there were 15 to 20 feet of mud on top. The race had begun. They have 4 weeks to be slewing. The first stage was to use a large dozer to tear up the frozen ground. A machine as old as the sun, the Deten dozer, was dumped off. A gut-wrenching issue arose. The enormous 10-foot steel claw that was required to rip into the permafrost, known as the ripper shank, was absent. A vehicle without tires is comparable to a dozer without a ripper shank. It served no use at all. All of their plans came to a halt. The brief Klondike mining season was fast coming to an end, and they were doomed without that one piece of steel. A dozer without a ripper is like a truck without tires. Even if I understand, Tony didn't want to give me his best tools. In the water, we are dead. In their dream of 1,000 ounces slipping farther out of their reach, money burned every second they waited. Panic struck. The first and most crucial component of the whole jigsaw was the ripper's shank. There would be no mining without it. They were on their own since Kevin and Brennan knew Tony wouldn't be much assistance. There was a great deal of pressure. After years of working in the field, Brennan came up with a concept. Kevin felt sick to his stomach since it was a long shot and a really crazy concept. One individual undoubtedly possessed an extra Den dozer ripper shank. That individual was Parker Schnabel, and that was the issue. To put it mildly, Parker and the Beets family had a difficult past. Kevin had seen Parker only once in the past 10 years, usually when he was bickering with Tony. The atmosphere during those sessions was never pleasant. For the past 10 years or so, I've only ever seen him in passing, yes. Or when he needed to visit Tony to speak with him. He was therefore not always in the best of moods. It was difficult to accept the idea of going to him with what was in hand. However, what options did they have? They were in a grave situation. Kevin consented with a sorrowful heart. The 3 miles to Parker's new claim on Dominion Creek were driven by him and Brennan in their truck. As they pulled up, the anxiety in the air was palpable. Parker looked up, startled to see Brennan, his former foreman, and even more shocked to see Kevin. After their major argument, the two had not communicated for a few years. Parker approached with an inquisitive expression. There was an awkward silence, and then Kevin gave the explanation. He didn't have a ripper shank, but he had a dozer. Parker got right to the point with his first inquiry. He was curious as to whether Tony was involved. Kevin clarified that Faith and he had gone out alone and that this was their operation. We don't have a ripper shank on our dozer. Hopefully, you have one that you're ready to let go of. A ripping shank is what Tony needs. Oh no. This year, Faith and I have ventured out on our own. Tony is lending us his dozer, but it doesn't have a ripper shank. As soon as Parker learned that Tony would not be participating in the new endeavor, his whole demeanor shifted. His expression changed to one of respect and perhaps even relief. He was aware of the challenges of starting off alone. He said he had a shank for Kevin. Parker gave him credit for the $11,000 sitem, which was a significant expense for a fledgling operation. Start a tab without putting any money down. $11,000. For that one, 11 grand is a good price. You have nothing to pay for right now. You open a tab. Thank you for that. Do it. I am quite thrilled. I am aware of how challenging it can be to get started. That's fantastic. It was an amazing act of kindness. At last, the stress subsided. In an indication that old wounds might mend, Parker even invited Brennan over for a beverage at some point. This victory was enormous. Kevin felt a tremendous weight come off his shoulders as they loaded up the crucial piece of steel. At last, they could begin digging. They could now attack Scribner Creek's frozen ground with Parker's assistance. However, they were unaware that the ground itself was ready to retaliate. A sense of hope filled the little crew as they returned to Scribner Creek with the new ripper shank fastened to the dozer. Time to get working. Brennan hammered the ripper into the ground after jumping in the dawn. However, the ground was not easily moved. Scribner Creek wasn't a mere assertion. Old-time Klondikes had a bad opinion of it. It was not referred to as Scribner because of its terrible tendency to swallow operations whole and put them to sleep for good. They called it the sleeper. Even more infamous was the Lynx Cut, the precise location Kevin wished to mine. 2 forks of the stream encircled the teardrop-shaped bit of land, which the locals referred to as the Forsaken Isle, cutting it off from the main valley. Miners had attempted and failed to tame it for generations. The terrain was particularly dangerous, with odd, thick patches of fog that would suddenly drift in. Even on clear days, it can be confusing for any employees. It's a little frightening, but what? I have faith that we will succeed. Check to see whether I can walk as well. According to legend, an ancient force guarded the island. That the earth itself was unwilling to part with its riches. Brennan and Kevin were going to discover that there was some truth to those legends. The permafrost was much harder than the drill log indicated, like concrete. But the dozer roared. The machine was forcefully rattled by the massive buried pebbles that filled it. Already an outdated machine, the den was being overworked and burning through diesel at a startling pace. The original plan, which called for stripping 3 acres in a few weeks, was rapidly becoming absurd. A week passed, then 2 days. The heavy, muddy overburden was so thick that they had hardly touched it. They spent a fortune on gasoline and time for every inch they gained. Like sand, the brief 4-month mining season was slipping through their fingers. The 1,000-ounce target seemed unattainable. Faith's concern grew every day as she observed the fuel expenses mounting. After receiving the ripper shank, their hope vanished, and the harsh, cold truth of their predicament took its place. It felt as though the abandoned easel was actively working to shatter them, and it was living up to its name. They were losing terribly, eroding their finances and hope with each hour of the war they were fighting against the ground itself. The tipping point. The conflict went on. Hard work for weeks had produced nearly nothing. A mound of dirt had been transported, but it was all useless overburden. The gravel below was rich in gold, but they were far from it. The crew was worn out. The machinery was malfunctioning. Furthermore, the dream was becoming a nightmare. Kevin had reached his limit. He was being crushed by the weight of his life savings, his wife's faith in him, and the pledge he had given his crew. He began to believe the old-timers were correct. The curse was Scribner Creek. The mine had a gloomy vibe. Quiet desperation took the place of the initial thrill. Even with his great skills, Brennan was unable to overcome the harsh realities of the terrain. Despite his best efforts to drive the machines, just spinning their wheels was costing them hundreds of dollars every day. There was a problem with the math. They would be broke long before they spotted their first gold flake if they continued at this rate. Failure was inevitable rather than merely probable. As Kevin was considering the heartbreaking choice to close everything down, a vehicle pulled up the muddy access road. Parker Schnabel was the one. He wasn't there to check on his Rippershank or have a casual beer. Through the Klondike grapevine, he had learned that Kevin's operation was facing significant challenges. He exited his truck and looked around. The weary crew, the laboring dozer, and the pitiful little strip of bare earth. He could see Kevin's eyes were filled with desperation. Parker kicked at the freezing soil as he walked the cut. He realized the scope of the issue after witnessing the enormous boulders they had removed. One aged D10 wasn't cut out for this work. An army of iron was needed on this ground. He heard Kevin describe their burn rate, their lack of advancement, and their waning optimism. Parker offered neither pity nor straightforward counsel. He had a broader perspective. Beneath all that muck and frustration, there was a big opportunity. Well, Parker, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you indeed. I'm glad to assist. Nice to see you all. Likewise. I wish you luck. Old time. I'd better offer you a hug. A plan started to take shape in his mind as he glanced at Kevin and then at the Forsaken Isles' uncharted territory. It was such a bold strategy that it would either preserve Kevin's season or cause the greatest catastrophe the Klondike had ever witnessed. Parker wasted little time. He presented an idea that was both astounding and ingenious. He was waging a lost battle, he informed Kevin. His small-scale operation found the ground too difficult, while Parker's fleet of enormous machines found it easy. A few weeks ago, such an arrangement would have been unimaginable, but he suggested a joint endeavor. To tackle the Forsaken Isle, Parker would deploy his crew, rock trucks, enormous excavators, and his fabled Sluifer wash plant. This was the offer. The heavy lifting would be handled by Parker's company, which would run the pay dirt and strip the ground. They would divide the gold in exchange. However, Parker included an extremely generous and important condition. Only once Kevin had achieved his first 1,000-ounce target would the 5,050 split start. Kevin would have the entire first 10,000 ounces, which would enable him to repay his investment, cover his expenses, and demonstrate to everyone, especially to himself, that he was capable of reaching his goal. The offer was once in a lifetime. In essence, Parker was putting his own time, fuel, and equipment at danger in order to assist his rival's son in getting off the ground first. It was like a lifeline handed to a man who was drowning, according to Kevin. He glanced to Brennan, who gave him a wide-eyed nod. They had no other choice. Saying no would mean embracing failure. Saying yes offered a genuine opportunity at success, but it also meant joining forces with his father's worst rival. The choice was simple. The most potent and surprising alliance in Klondike history began when Kevin shook Parker's hand. Like wildfire, the news spread. Parker Schnabel was relocating to Scribner Creek to run his entire business. They dragged his team out of Dominion Creek and diverted them. The objective was obvious, but the practicalities were a headache. On the cursed land that had almost broken Kevin Beets, unleashed the full might of an industrial-scale mining operation. Big Red and Sluifer had to be moved quickly, which would be an expensive and time-consuming logistical task. I'm thrilled that you folks have such a lovely wash plant, though. If we can run at least 23 hours a day, we should be able to make up part of the time that has been lost. With two businesses and millions of dollars at stake, the risk was greater than ever. Everyone was concentrating on a patch of land that had vanquished every child who ventured to touch it. Overnight, Parker's crew's arrival changed the forsaken ice-isle. The desolate, silent mine site erupted into a roaring hub of activity. A squadron of dozers, large excavators, and giant rock trucks swooped down on the claim. This new army of iron was too strong for the ground that had been fighting Kevin's Singleton for weeks. As Parker's squad began working with merciless efficiency, the ground shook. Working with his former crewmates, Brennan Rule was once again in his element, leading the symphony of destruction. In sharp contrast to the plodding, lethargic progress of the preceding weeks, the pace was frenzied. They had gone beyond merely grazing the surface. They were breaking the island's heart. Car-sized rocks were extracted from the permafrost by enormous excavators and loaded onto enormous rock trucks. Kevin could only have imagined the amount of dirt they moved, thousands of cubic yards per day. Parker's iconic wash plant, Sloifer, was the focal point of the new business. It was an enormous undertaking to move the beast, but once it was operational, it was a game-changer. It could consume everything the excavators fed it, processing hundreds of yards of pay dirt per hour. Finally, the cursed ground of Scribner Creek was being subdued not by resistance, but by sheer force. They created a gold river out of a cursed claim. For more, like and subscribe. Was this, however, Kevin's biggest achievement? Or did he simply sell the highest bidder his dream?